Jimmy Ford, get back in.
Okay. I don't know, we're coming over the west end. They want you to come back in now.
Roger, we've been trying to talk to you for a while here.
No, back in. Come on. You still got 3.5 more days to go, buddy.
(1965) marked the 15th year since scientists first used this triangular tract of scrubland for missile testing. Today, Cape Kennedy is the focal point of the United States commitment in space.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness.
Today, a great new chapter has been added to the story of creation and of growth. Man literally has wrenched himself away from the earth that bound him down through the millennia. He has soared to the moon. He has seen and shown it close. He has come back safe. That is the meaning of the mission of Apollo 8, humankind's first flight into the orbit of the moon, an event sure to be written larger on the books of history than almost any our generation has seen. This is a broadcast about the flight of Apollo 8. America's greatest space triumph and one of man's most remarkable achievements to date is the result of work by thousands of people and outlays of billions of dollars. We've seen, heard, and talked a great deal about the sophisticated hardware that lifted the astronauts away from the Earth, guided them so accurately to and from the moon, and kept us in touch and informed about their progress. But the three men, Borman, Lovell, and Anders, were the heart and soul of the mission, although their very human personalities tended to be submerged beneath their cool, smoothly functioning technical skill. But they carried with them man's many hopes and dreams about someday leaving his planet, and in interviews with David Shoemaker in Houston prior to the flight, they revealed how they felt.
I'd like to be on the first team, and I think that friendly competition among groups, among nations, among people is always healthy. I think the competition which we have in space between the Soviet Union and ourselves is very healthy.
2, 1, 0. Ignition.
1965 was the year of promise at Cape Kennedy. Promise for real achievement in manned space flight. Promise for a military boost in space with the first flights of the Air Force Titan 3C. Promise for more muscle for the nation's deterrent strength by refinement of the latest ballistic missile weapon system. Promise for advancement across a broad front of scientific investigation with unmanned satellites. The programs at the Cape, which only a few years ago were science fiction, are today becoming science fact. This is the Thor Delta rocket at work. It evolved from an early Air Force weapons program and is now an operational space booster used by Air Force and NASA for most satellite launches. The satellites launched in 1965 gave the U.S. valuable scientific information to study magnetic fields, cosmic rays, radiation, and solar flares. In other applications, satellites launched gave us accurate details about the Earth's topography. they provided live television and communications between continents. And pictures from space to aid weather forecasting. The satellites were injected into separate orbiting positions to serve as electronic sentries in space. The programs at the Cape vary, but one basic mission has not changed: the development and refinement of weapon systems vital to the defense of the United States and the free world. Minuteman II, America's most advanced intercontinental ballistic missile, continued testing during 1965. SAC's operational version will have a striking range of over 7,000 miles.
Holding momentarily. ATO switch to proceed. Proceed. Guidance monitor.
Number 1, go.
LSO.
LSO, go. -4, mark.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Seven Minuteman missiles were fired during 1965. All were successful. A different concept in weapon systems is the U.S. Navy's Polaris, launched from nuclear-powered submarines. Staging from Port Canaveral, each new submarine moves to a position 30 miles off the Cape coast to put both missile and crew through operational tests. The third-generation Polaris has a range of 2,800 miles. During 1965, there were 57 major launches from the Cape. Not so many as in previous years, but more demanding in the areas of launch support, tracking, and data gathering. Cape Kennedy, the downrange stations, and instrumented ships and aircraft make up the 10,000-mile-long Air Force Eastern Test Range. The growing complexity of space missions requires a massive amount of support from the range. Control of satellites, compiling of information for study of rocket performance, monitor and control to ensure safe operations during missile flight. Transition from a ballistic missile testing center to a space operations center will continue as the demands of the nation's most ambitious space program gathers momentum, landing an American on the moon by the end of the decade. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration proceeded on schedule toward that goal in 1965. The Ranger project, completed that year, provided the pictures of the moon's surface that prove there are areas smooth enough for a landing.
In the 8th year of manned flight into space, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration prepared men and equipment for the most advanced manned mission to date. Apollo 8, NASA's 17th manned space flight, took 3 American astronauts on a far-reaching half-million-mile journey into orbit around the moon and back to Earth. The historic 6-day, 3-hour mission of Apollo 8 demonstrated the performance of many activities required for the success of future manned flights, including landing men on the moon and returning them safely to Earth. The performance of the Apollo Saturn V, America's most powerful space vehicle, was again demonstrated on this mission. The 3-stage Saturn V launch vehicle had been qualified for the Apollo 8 flight, its first manned mission, by 2 successful unmanned launches. The flight worthiness of the command and service modules of the Apollo spacecraft had been proven on previous missions, including the 11-day manned Earth orbital mission of the Apollo 7. the ability of man to function normally, to perform specific activities, and to navigate the Apollo spacecraft on a distant flight were demonstrated by the three-man crew of Apollo 8. Frank Borman, a veteran of the Gemini program, was command pilot for the mission. James A. Lovell, who had participated in 2 Gemini flights, was command module pilot. And William A. Anders was lunar module pilot. NASA and crew confidence in the Apollo 8 mission was very high. Although difficult, it was one of the least complicated of possible lunar missions and was well within the design capabilities of the Apollo Saturn V space vehicle. The mission also contained several commit points, at which times mission control and the astronaut crew had options to proceed with the planned mission or, if necessary, switch to an alternate mission plan. In demonstrating the performance of the crew, the Apollo Saturn V space vehicle, and the mission support facilities on a manned lunar mission, Apollo 8 accomplished the first of its primary mission objectives. The second primary objective was concerned with planned activities performed during the mission, including translunar injection, command service module navigation, communications, and mid-course corrections, an assessment of fuel and other items consumed on the mission, and passive thermal control, that is, external temperature control of the command service modules in deep space. The 28-hour final countdown for Apollo 8 was begun on the night of December 19th by the manned launch operations team at Kennedy Space Center. The launch date for Apollo 8, set in November, was maintained throughout the rigorous checkout and countdown of the complex Apollo Saturn V space vehicle. In the early morning hours of December 21st, the three-man crew of Apollo 8 boarded the NASA transfer van and began their journey to the launch pad at Complex 39. With monitors in the Launch Control Center indicating all spacecraft and launch vehicle systems functioning normally, the astronauts entered the spacecraft. The countdown proceeded smoothly with no unscheduled holds. About 4 minutes before liftoff, the last manual check of all launch consoles was completed. At T-minus 3 minutes and 7 seconds, an automatic sequencer took over the countdown. As the clock reached T-minus 8 and 9/10 seconds, the engines of the first stage were ignited. The 6-million-pound Apollo Saturn space vehicle slowly rose from its launch pad and then climbed into space at an accelerating speed. Liftoff of Apollo 8 was recorded at 7:51 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, precisely on schedule. The launch azimuth was exactly 72 degrees.
Loud and clear. Launch mode 1 Bravo, Apollo 8. Mode 1B. Apollo 8, you're looking good. Roger. Apollo 8 Houston, you're looking good here, right down the center line.
Roger, Apollo 8.
Apollo 8 coming up on 20 seconds to ignition. Mark it, and you're looking very good.
Roger. Ignition.
Roger, ignition.
The third stage engine was reignited at 2 hours, 50 minutes, and 36 seconds into the flight. The engine burned for 5 minutes and 19 seconds, raising Apollo 8's speed to a velocity of 24,200 miles per hour, thrusting Apollo from Earth orbit toward the moon. For the first time, man had left his home planet to begin a translunar flight through space. The third stage had performed its function perfectly, and 20 minutes after translunar insertion, spacecraft separation occurred. Following a short period of station keeping, the spacecraft moved away in preparation for third stage fuel dump. The remaining liquid oxygen in the third stage was then released, which increased the velocity of the stage on a new trajectory. This eliminated the possibility of recontact with the spacecraft by placing the stage in a trajectory passing behind the moon and into solar orbit. At 6 hours and 33 minutes into the flight, the astronauts tested the S-band high-gain steerable antenna. Flown for the first time, this small 70-inch wide antenna was used for most of the two-way transmissions between the spacecraft and mission control. The small antenna performed better than predicted. Throughout the translunar flight, the astronauts conducted star, Earth horizon, and lunar sightings to demonstrate the accuracy of onboard navigation and evaluate the optical subsystem for future deep space manned missions. For the first time, man took photographs of the receding Earth, as well as many of the approach to the moon. During the translunar flight, the Earth's gravitational pull gradually decreased Apollo 8's velocity to 2,170 miles per hour. Then, as lunar gravity overcame the Earth's diminishing pull, spacecraft velocity increased. As Apollo 8 neared the moon, another extensive evaluation of all systems was conducted by the crew and mission control. If no further maneuvers were made, the spacecraft would circle the moon and head back to Earth on a free return trajectory. However, mission control and the astronauts decided to commit for lunar orbit. On Christmas Eve, at 69 hours and 8 minutes, the service module propulsion system was fired to deboost the spacecraft into lunar orbit. The initial elliptical orbit was 69 by 193 miles above the lunar surface. After a complete systems check and confirmation from mission control, a second burn of the service propulsion system engine circularized the orbit to a planned 69 miles above the moon. For the first time, man looked upon the surface of the moon with his unaided eyes and saw greater detail than ever before.
Houston, what does the old moon look like from 60 miles, over?
Okay, Houston. The moon is essentially gray. No color. Looks like plaster of Paris. Or sort of a grayish beach sand. We can see quite a bit of detail. The Sea of Fertility doesn't stand out as well here as it does back on Earth. Not much contrast between that and the surrounding craters. The craters are all rounded off. There's quite a few of them. Some of them are newer. Some look like, especially the round ones, look like hit by meteorites or projectiles of some sort.
Man had orbited the moon and looked upon its surface. He had tracked and photographed potential landing sites for future manned missions. He had accomplished the age-old dream of traveling to the moon, and now was on his way home to Earth. During the 2-day, 9-hour return trip to Earth, additional navigational sightings were performed. and communication and thermal control tests conducted. Apollo 8's primary guidance and navigation system was operated automatically for controlling the spacecraft's return trajectory. Mission Control updated return course information to the command module computer at least every 10 hours.
Tuned in the future because there'll be flights in rendezvous in the Earth orbit, and then of course there'll be television from the lunar surface itself in the not too far distant future. So until then, I guess this is
On December 27th, as Apollo 8 approached Earth, the spacecraft was manually maneuvered in preparation for separation from the service module. 15 minutes before atmospheric entry, the command module separated from the service module. The spacecraft was then automatically maneuvered to the proper attitude for entry. Traveling 24,530 miles per hour, Apollo 8 began Earth entry 7.5 miles above the western Pacific Ocean. As Apollo 8 streaked through the Pacific night, an airborne camera photographed the blazing trail of the spacecraft and its ablative material. Following a direct descent flight path, Apollo 8 traveled 1,560 miles across the Earth's surface and splashed down in the Pacific with pinpoint accuracy, less than 4 miles from its recovery ship. The first night landing of a manned spacecraft brought the epical lunar journey to an end with the precision that characterized the entire mission. Apollo 8 had splashed down on target and on schedule at 6 days, 2 hours, and 59 minutes after liftoff. On man's first flight to the moon, all primary mission objectives had been completely accomplished. Every detailed test objective had been met, as well as 5 which were not originally planned. While overwhelming praise was given to astronauts Borman, Lovell, and Anders for their historic accomplishment, just praise was also given to the Apollo launch and mission teams, who had coped with many difficult constraints in carrying out the complicated launch and mission. Apollo 8 climaxed a year of manned spaceflight progress and demonstrated with awesome perfection the capability of United States crews and equipment to fly into space beyond the equilibrium point of the Earth's gravitational pull.
I'd like to be on the first team. And I think that friendly competition among groups, among nations, among people is always healthy. I think the competition which we have in space between the Soviet Union and ourselves is very healthy. Of course, I'd like to be the first around.
Not saying the complete truth, I didn't feel that I hoped that our flight or a flight of Americans will be the first to see the backside of the moon.
I don't believe that the program as a whole would have survived as well after the fire if we wouldn't have had this momentum and this desire to complete this goal. That was a good idea.
You know, we've been planning this flight for years and years, and sometimes when you read about it and hear it for so long, you think that the goal is academic, you know. You don't really finally understand that you're really going to try something like this. And now it's getting closer, and we're not just talking about something in the future. We're talking about something right now. The goal, to me, is just as important as it was back in 1961.
I think that what risks there are have been well considered and designed for to attempt to alleviate these risks. And I think that the gain that we will get to our Apollo program and the gain that our country and all the nations of the world will receive from this first step of exploration will certainly make any risk I might take more than worth it.
We've taken a rather conservative approach to this first lunar mission. It's one that makes sense. We're doing it where we only have to bother or concern ourselves with one vehicle. We don't have to train for a rendezvous or a lunar landing. And really, you know, this is the program we've been working on for almost 10 years now, so there's a lot of good hard engineering in it. I don't really think we've left anything unturned. I hope we haven't. Of course, you'll never know until we finally do it.